The authorities' strategy of reintroducing artificially bred individuals to revive the population is not delivering the expected results. This farm, located in China, specifically in the northern Shanxi province near the Qinling mountain range, is where they breed Chinese giant salamanders. Annually, an average of 10,300 salamanders are raised here. They're mostly bred for consumption or as ingredients in traditional medicine. However, there's one problem with these animals: they can't survive in the wild. But why? Let's find out. To better understand why these salamanders can't survive in the wild, let's start by tracing their entire evolutionary journey. Salamanders are believed to have emerged during the Jurassic period, around 150 to 170 million years ago. Modern classification places them in the Cryptobranchidae family. Nothing much changed for a while, and then around 55 to 70 million years ago, the Andreas genus separated from the family. This happened during the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, a time of cataclysms, the extinction of many species, and the complete transformation of ecosystems. Remarkably, these salamanders remained unaffected. They had their own thing. About 8 million years ago, the Andreas genus split into two known species, Andreas davidianus and Andreas japonicus. Between 11 million and 3 million years ago, the Chinese giant salamander gave a surprise to modern scientists, but we'll get to that story later. Chinese giant salamanders peacefully existed for millions of years, largely untouched by humans. However, once they found their way onto human menus and started being bred on farms, things took a turn for the worse. How do salamanders end up on farms? Well, they're first captured in the wild, placed in tanks, and then they mate. The offspring emerge, then mate, and the cycle goes on. So what's the big deal? Farms worldwide do this with all kinds of animals, and every now and then they toss in some wild salamanders to mix things up and avoid inbreeding. Alright, let's check out these farms. In 2012, Shanxi province farms made up roughly 70% of all salamander breeding in China. But there are also many farms in Guizhou and a handful in other provinces. It's a pretty popular and profitable animal-based business with a long, fascinating history. Chinese giant salamanders are notably larger than other amphibians, earning them the title of the world's largest. Despite looking like a long, slimy blob with legs and small eyes, these creatures are apex predators. However, their hunting style is quite lazy. They prefer to stay hidden and snatch whatever food comes their way. To survive with this approach, Chinese giant salamanders have expanded their menu significantly, enjoying a variety of insects, millipedes, nematodes, other amphibians, including fellow salamanders, freshwater crabs, shrimp, fish, and even Asian water shrews. Giant salamanders spend most of their time submerged, only surfacing to breathe. And interestingly, they don't do it like typical animals. Instead, they breathe through their skin. Another intriguing amphibian quality is their remarkable ability to regenerate even large tissue fragments when wounded. All of this is what made the Chinese giant salamanders so ancient and so resilient. Throughout their existence, salamanders have not changed much, so the salamander you see on the screen is pretty much the same one some T-Rex might have seen. And T-Rex would probably notice it, because the Chinese giant salamanders are, well, giant. This one in human hands looks very large, about the size of an average dog, and that's not the limit. By the way, check out the feet. Some might find them disgusting, but for others, they might be surprisingly cute. For quite some time, people mistakenly regarded the Chinese giant salamander as a single species. However, it eventually became clear that originally, or since the study began, there are 5 to 8 distinct species of Chinese giant salamanders in their natural habitat. Why the confusion? The primary issue lies in their genetic diversity, but they look very similar to each other. Even seasoned experts in zoology or salamander studies would struggle to distinguish them, let alone the farmers who raise them on farms. Can you guess where this is going? The farmers didn't realize they were breeding different species. However, these species were similar enough to mate and were actively reproducing. They mingled with each other, slowly losing critical distinctions that had enabled their survival. At some point, experts noticed this and raised the alarm. Suddenly, it became clear that the Chinese giant salamander was on the brink of extinction, and the search, a challenging one, yielded no results. Where once 2 or 3 salamanders could be found in a single evening, there were none. To find out just how bad it was, the experts trudged through mud and cow manure. Late into the night, they waded through streams in rubber thigh-high boots, exploring small caves among the rocks, favored hiding spots for nocturnal creatures. Despite their best efforts, not a single wild salamander was found in a single summer. People catch salamanders way quicker than they can reproduce, whether it's for selling as meat or for using on farms. But either way, the result is the same. On farms, you'll find wild salamanders with unique traits. They give birth to hybrids, and this isn't just a one-time thing. Over 1,000 amphibians in captivity have been genetically analyzed, and it turns out they're all hybrids. Where there's a bunch of hybrids, we end up losing genetic diversity and individual uniqueness. Things got pretty sad for a while. The wild salamander population took a nosedive because the price for live salamanders shot up and farms just kept getting bigger. With more people poaching for these farms, the risk of these amphibians going extinct went through the roof. In an effort to fix the problem, the Chinese authorities went for a simple tactic: releasing captive bred salamanders into the wild to restore the numbers of these unique endangered animals. This is a very, very bad idea. Why? Because most animals are hybrids. Imagine 5 species of salamanders, each perfectly adapted to a specific region. Now picture them being brought together, and the genetic mix is compared to a witch's cauldron by scientists studying Chinese giant salamanders in captivity. It's a real genetic mishmash. Releasing amphibians into the wild to restore their population isn't the best idea. It could actually end up causing more harm, leading to the extinction of unique species and a loss of genetic diversity. After all, salamanders and other animals have been managing this delicate balance for millions of years. However, there's more to the issue. Just like in any other place, diseases can pop up on farms. Salamanders in captivity can get sick and recover because they built up immunity to certain diseases. The catch is, these same salamanders might carry infections without even showing symptoms. Releasing them from farms, seemingly to boost wild populations, ends up causing a bunch of problems. A whole lot of them, actually. In April 2022, Guangzhou police solved a case involving the theft of giant salamanders, which were valued at more than 300,000 yuan. That's about $41,000. The stolen batch included over 30 of these creatures. That's how expensive they are. So expensive that some people resort to more serious crimes than simple theft. In 2010, in the city of Hanzhong, a 20-year-old farmer from a village found out that a farm raising Chinese giant salamanders was planning to give away the young animals to shareholders. So the farmer decided to steal the young salamanders. He went to the farm and found the caretaker there. Knowing the caretaker could get in his way, the farmer went back home, took a hoe, and tricked the caretaker into leaving the farm. As the unsuspecting caretaker walked ahead, the farmer struck him on the head with the hoe, the caretaker fell, and the farmer finished the job with his hands. Then he stole a key from the caretaker's pocket, broke into the farm, and took 1,309 small salamanders worth 137,445 yuan, or $20,000. Despite trying to cover up the caretaker's death and getting rid of evidence, the criminal was still caught and sentenced to death for his actions. China doesn't take these things lightly. Unfortunately, despite having strict laws and harsh penalties, the protection of Chinese giant salamanders in the country isn't as effective as expected. The fine for illegally hunting these creatures in China is quite low, only 50 yuan or $6, while restaurants are willing to pay $250 to $400 for 2 pounds of giant salamander meat. So naturally, poaching is going strong. They even have a special hunting tool made of bamboo and sharp hooks with bait. It allows them to catch salamanders alive. As you may remember, they sell them not only for meat but also for breeding. In the 1990s, as the Chinese giant salamander population dwindled, poachers took drastic measures by poisoning streams on a large scale to eliminate the remaining animals. It was brutal, but it got the job done quickly. It's interesting that people didn't traditionally hunt giant salamanders in Asia. It wasn't an ancient practice. It's a dire necessity that occurred during the Great Chinese Famine from 1959 to 1961. This devastating period resulted in the death of around 15 million people according to official records, led to extreme measures with unofficial estimates suggesting an even more staggering 45 million victims. During that period, people started seeking out alternative food sources. This massive amphibian with a weight potential of 132 pounds became a go-to choice. Sadly, the salamander population has decreased by over 80% since 1960, mostly because humans have been catching too many and destroying their habitat. habitats. By the 1990s, Chinese giant salamanders went from being a survival food for the poor to becoming a sought-after delicacy. It's not clear how it happened. Special farms started receiving government subsidies, growing in number. This made a bunch of people seriously wealthy. See those dishes over there? They're actually cooked with Chinese giant salamander meat. People often put these amphibians into soups, stew them up, and so on. Every year, the hype just kept growing. In 2013, the prices for these animals went through the roof. 1 pound of giant salamanders could be sold for over 2,000 yuan, which is roughly $280. These high prices played a part in why Chinese giant salamanders remained a bit of a mystery. Scientists struggled to get their hands on these creatures for proper experiments. Then came the wealth myth effect. Breeding salamanders became a lucrative business, attracting more and more people to give it a shot. The wild salamander population took a hit, and eventually, the supply was bigger than the demand. Then along came the coronavirus, which was tied to the wildlife trade, prompting the government to rethink their approach to breeding all sorts of species. Before this happened, people were eager to get any part of the salamander body. The meat, besides being tasty, was thought to have some health perks. Different parts of the Chinese giant salamander, like the skin, muscles, slime, bones, and whatnot, were used in traditional medicine. There's even this idea to mix the skin powder with tongue oil for treating burns. Does it work? Honestly, who can say for sure? Even with the drop in demand, farms like this one are still going strong. Right now, there are over 10,000 farmers raising salamanders, and about 7 or 8 households have more than 1 million of these creatures. Each year, Shanxi province cranks out around 16 million baby salamanders, while Hansong produces about 14 million. These farms are huge, like this one covering about 27 acres with a total investment of more than 3 million yuan, which is over $400,000. You might be wondering, why go out and catch wild salamanders when we have a bunch of them on farms? Can't they just do their thing naturally? Well, turns out they can't. The success of making baby salamanders in cement tanks is pretty dismal. To keep these little guys from biting the dust, they have to mix in some wild ones who know how to get the job done. Salamanders, in general, are kind of picky. They require specific conditions, so unlike usual farms designed for people's convenience, salamander farms need to be all about the salamanders. They definitely need clean running water, quiet surroundings, and you can't just toss them in a cage and expect them to start a family. Salamanders can't handle life without a cozy spot to hide from the light, or, at best, they won't make babies, and at worst, they might just die. Farmers have quite a few things to care about. When baby salamanders are fresh out of their shells, they're around 0.7 inches long, chilling on their sides in the water. They don't move much, just float around, relying on their tails to drift. And they usually switch positions every 1 to 2 hours. This is what they look like in the early stage. Unlike many other animals that are all playful in their baby days, salamanders aren't big on moving around. They stay in plastic buckets with no more than 5 salamanders per 15 square inches. As they grow, these creatures are sorted out, and when they hit 3 inches, it's time to put them into cement pools. Salamanders take their time growing. These little guys, they're maybe a couple of months old. It takes about 5 months of eating for newly hatched salamanders to hit a body length of 4 to 5 inches. That's pretty slow. As time goes on, salamanders get big enough that you can move them with your hands instead of a bucket. But out in the wild, it takes a solid 5 to 6 years for them to grow up, hit maturity, and weigh over 1 pound. And even in man-made conditions, it takes at least 3 years to reach the right size for market standards. And look how many salamanders there are in one pool. The water is crystal clear because, it's just damn clean. Plus, it's got to be at a specific temperature. Most salamanders stop eating when the water hits above 68 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's just perfect if it's somewhere between 60 and 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything above 95 degrees Fahrenheit is a no-go. It's downright deadly. And when it comes to reproducing, you also need the right setup. Again, the water can't be colder than 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, and just so you know, you'll typically find the Chinese giant salamander at altitudes between 980 and 2,600 feet in nature. Something worth keeping in mind if you want to breed them. The thing about having a bunch of tanks isn't just a trend or because they sold off the concrete pools. While you can put a few salamanders together, don't bet on them being the friendliest neighbors. As they age, these creatures tend to start jostling for their own space. The pool can be any shape, but it's got to be over 3 feet tall to keep these animals from making a break for it. Smaller salamanders, of course, should be kept separate from the adults because these animals don't mind cannibalism even when they have other food to eat. In captivity, salamanders have a pretty diverse diet, just like in the wild. It's a mix of fish, shrimp, crabs, eels, frogs, earthworms, insects, and byproducts from pigs, cattle, sheep, chickens, and other birds. Yeah, you can totally toss a chicken their way. They won't mind, though the chicken might not feel the same way. Right next to where they raise the animals on the farm, you've got the salamander production and processing spots, unless they're sold live. Tour buses come and go here from time to time. As with many such farms, tourists usually have lunch after the tour and buy something tasty as a souvenir, or something useful. Salamanders, as you remember, are reported to have healing properties. Even though it might seem like salamanders are taking life easy, slow to grow, and just generally laid back, they'll run away if they catch a chance. The Chinese giant salamander is surprisingly swift on land or in water, can climb high, and according to one Chinese article, even lift heavy stuff. These creatures will make a run for it the moment the farmer isn't paying attention. You have to keep an extra eye on them during heavy rain. All water entrances and exits, walkways, and the whole farm should have devices to prevent them from running away. Chasing a salamander in the rain, trying to catch that big, agile, and slippery thing is not exactly a fun experience. Not to mention that salamanders are a valuable thing that someone always wants to steal. Oh, and don't forget this important tidbit. Chinese giant salamanders get busy in their breeding season every year from mid-August to mid-October. In one pond, you'll find about 20 breeding salamanders with over 10 special caves built just for the occasion. Farmers can sneak a peek. Observe the process through viewing holes above the caves, of course. Chinese giant salamanders do their breeding in water, and their babies hatch about 40 to 60 days after the female lays her eggs. During this time, salamanders can be quite picky about water quality, surroundings, and temperature. However, if you're willing to deal with these quirks, there's a chance, or at least there used to be, to rake in some good money. A household raising 100 giant salamanders could pocket about $7,000 in net profit after a year, which is more than 50,000 yuan. Yet, in 2020, the market wholesale price for adult giant salamanders weighing 7 to 9 pounds was roughly 75 to 100 yuan for 2 pounds, or about $10 to $14. But what's up with restoring China's population of giant salamanders in the wild? Things aren't looking good. Experts say there's no effort to prevent farmers from releasing hybrids into the wild wherever they want. Plus, no one's even trying to figure out the best environment for each salamander species. Hybrid animals can wreak genetic havoc, and authorities are fully aware of this. Way back in 2009, scientists discussed this problem, trying to emphasize the gravity of the situation, but their warnings were simply brushed off. Since then, over 70,000 salamanders have been set free into the wild, all in random places, all belonging to different species. In 2013, a massive project was launched to study Chinese giant salamanders. Scientists spent 4 years scouring China's freshwater streams for the endangered animals and concluded that things were very bad. Over a span of 3 years, researchers explored riverbeds across 16 regions at 97 sites. They encountered giant salamanders at just 4 locations. Genetic analysis indicated that these animals weren't local, likely bred on farms. When 3,000 locals were interviewed, half of them mentioned seeing salamanders in the wild in the past, but the last confirmed sightings were around 18 years ago. Another more optimistic takeaway? Ensuring the breeding of genetically pure salamanders from farms is a way to preserve them. And here's some additional good news. They've recently found a natural purebred population of Chinese giant salamanders in a national reserve in Jiangxi province. Interestingly, this marks the first population with a distinct genetic identity and consistent reproduction in the wild. But is there anything we can do to fix the situation? Well, there is a solution. However, it requires us to listen to the advice of experts and stop releasing salamanders without first studying their genetic makeup. So here's the plan. We somehow analyze the genetics of salamanders on the farms, and if there are purebred species, separate them and focus on selective breeding. Then release the resulting animals, but strictly in locations designated by nature. Is it a challenge? Absolutely. In fact, it's likely nearly impossible. But at the moment, there are no other alternatives. The solution is entirely in the hands of the Chinese authorities. Ordinary people, even if they were very eager to save Chinese giant salamanders, would likely make things worse. Of course, it's not fair to say that Chinese authorities are doing nothing. Since 1988, they have implemented legal measures to protect the giant salamander and have established 22 nature reserves in central and southern China to conserve its natural habitat. Additionally, there's a rule that only the second generation of artificially bred animals can be consumed and sold, and obtaining a license is necessary for artificial breeding. However, considering the penalties for poaching, it seems like a small price to pay. See you later!